Somebody already solved it. Not a monk, not a mystic. A German bank clerk with no reputation and no audience, who spent 4 years working out, line by line, the way a man balances a ledger, what existence is actually for. He finished. He paid to have it printed. He called it the philosophy of redemption. The night the copies arrived from the printer, he took his own life. He was 34. For 150 years, that story has been passed around as a warning about thinking too much. That reading is lazy, it's also wrong. The problem was never that he thought too hard. His proof contains one word he never defined, and that same word, undefined, sits inside every private verdict you have ever delivered about your own life at 3 in the morning. Start with the part nobody says out loud about people who solve life. They don't sound insane, they sound calm, unusually calm. There's a specific quality to the voice of someone who has arrived at a total explanation for existence. A flatness, a lack of hurry, a sense that the argument is finished and everyone else is still filling out forms. Families describe it afterward with the same word, over and over, peaceful. He seemed peaceful. That calm is not what people think it is, and understanding what it actually is might be the most useful thing you learn this year. Notice that we treat certainty as a sign of intelligence. The person who has it worked out, who speaks without hedging, who doesn't circle, we read that as depth. It almost never occurs to anyone that certainty is also what a narrowing system produces on its way to shutting down. A mind with many live options is slow and hesitant and irritating to listen to. A mind with one option left is crisp. Because a solution to life is not a discovery, it's an event. It happens inside a nervous system, at a particular hour, under particular conditions, and those conditions leave fingerprints all over the conclusion. In 1994, a psychologist at the University of Maryland named Arthur Kruglanski published a scale with his colleague Donna Webster measuring something he called the need for cognitive closure, the human appetite for a firm answer, any firm answer, over the discomfort of ambiguity, not the desire for a correct answer, the desire for a finished one. Kruglanski's work mapped how the mind behaves under that appetite. 2 movements: seizing, grabbing the first explanation that fits the available data, then freezing, locking it in and defending it against everything that arrives afterward. Here is the part that matters. Need for closure is not a fixed personality trait. It spikes. It rises predictably under fatigue, under time pressure, under ambient noise, under exhaustion. Put a well-rested person in a quiet room, and they'll tolerate an unresolved question for hours. Put the same person under mental strain, and they will seize on the first coherent story available and freeze around it like concrete. The mind does not seek truth when it is tired. It seeks closure, and then dresses closure in truth's clothing. Now hold that thought, because the man who solved life wrote most of his proof at night, after military drills, on almost no sleep, while working the ranks of a cuirassier regiment he had voluntarily joined at 33. He was not stupid, he was not weak. Professional philosophers still cannot find the crack in his logic, which is exactly why the story keeps getting told the wrong way. His proof had premises. Premises can be checked, so let's check them. Premise 1. Everything alive is a machine that wants. In 1860, in a bookshop in Naples, a 20-year-old German clerk named Philipp pulled a 2-volume book off a shelf by an author almost nobody was reading yet. The World as Will and Representation, Arthur Schopenhauer. Batz later described the encounter as the central event of his life. He read it the way some people convert. He eventually took a pen name, Mainländer, after the town on the Main where he was born, and spent the rest of his short life building on the foundation he found that afternoon. So the first premise isn't his, he inherited it. Schopenhauer's claim, published in 1818 to almost total public silence, was this: underneath the world of appearances, there is one thing, and that thing is not reason, not God, not order. It's will. A blind, ceaseless, purposeless striving that expresses itself as gravity in a stone, as growth in a plant, as hunger in an animal, and as desire in you. Same engine, different housings. And from that, a conclusion that most people find offensive on first contact. All willing arises from lack. Lack is suffering. So life, at its root, is not a thing that occasionally suffers. It is suffering, occasionally interrupted. Schopenhauer's sharpest move was about pleasure. He argued that satisfaction is negative, not a positive quantity that arrives, but the temporary cessation of a discomfort that was already there. You are not happy when you eat. You are unhungry. The pleasure is the sound of a pain switching off. And when the pain switches off and there's no new want in the queue, something else moves in. He called it boredom, and he treated it as the more honest state of the two. The moment the machine idles and you can finally hear the engine. Life, he wrote, swings like a pendulum between pain and boredom. Most people read that and file it under 19th century pessimism, something to admire from a distance and not take personally. Then, 130 years later, two neuroscientists at the University of Michigan accidentally proved a piece of it in a laboratory. Berridge and Terry Robinson were studying reward in rats. The assumption at the time was simple. Dopamine is the pleasure chemical. Take it away, and the animal stops enjoying things. So they depleted dopamine and expected the rats to lose interest in sugar. The rats did stop pursuing it. They would starve in front of food they had chased days earlier. But when the researchers put sucrose directly on their tongues, the rats produced exactly the same facial reactions of pleasure they had produced before. The liking was completely intact. What had been destroyed was the wanting. Two systems, separate anatomy. Dopamine drives the pursuit, a broad, powerful, tireless machinery of craving. Liking runs on something much smaller and more fragile, a scattered set of what Berridge named hedonic hotspots, opioid-driven, easily satisfied, easily silenced. Read that structure again, because it is Schopenhauer's metaphysics rendered in tissue. The apparatus that makes you want is enormous and never stops. The apparatus that lets you enjoy is tiny and shuts off almost immediately. You are not built to be satisfied, you're built to pursue. Satisfaction is a brief administrative pause in the pursuing, which is why the lottery study everyone half remembers keeps refusing to die. In 1978, Philipp Mainländer and colleagues at Northwestern published a paper comparing 22 lottery winners against a control group and against people who had been recently paralyzed in accidents. The winners, months after their windfall, were not measurably happier than the controls. Worse, they rated ordinary daily pleasures as less enjoyable than the controls did. Coffee, conversation, a morning. The big win had recalibrated the scale, and everything small had shrunk underneath it. The sample was tiny, and the study has been oversighted for 40 years. I'd rather tell you that than pretend it's stronger than it is. But its central finding has survived replication after replication under a colder name, hedonic adaptation. Whatever you get, you normalize. Then the wanting reloads. So premise one holds, not as poetry, as mechanism. The being reading this sentence is a device that generates lack, resolves lack, and immediately generates more, which leaves an obvious question, and Mainländer's answer to it is where everything turns. Why would a universe build a machine like that? Premise 2. The universe is running toward the exit. Schopenhauer said the will is a will to live, endless, deathless, hungry. Mainländer looked at the same evidence and said his teacher had read the sign backwards. Consider what the universe actually does, he argued. Stars burn out, heat spreads until nothing can move. Organisms decay. Every species that has ever existed has, on a long enough scale, gone under. If you were an alien observer with no sentimentality, watching this system run, you would not describe a will to live. You'd describe a machine dismantling itself. So he inverted the premise. Not Wille zum Leben, will to live. Wille zum Tode, will to die. Every straining, striving, reproducing, clawing thing is not fighting toward existence. It is taking the longest available route out of it. Life is what non-being looks like while it's still in progress. And then he did something no philosopher before him had the nerve to do. He explained why. In the beginning, he wrote, there was a simple unity, call it God. This unity was complete, undifferentiated, and, crucially, trapped. It could not change, because change requires parts, and it had none. It possessed exactly one freedom available to a perfect and unbearable oneness. It could stop existing, so it did. And because a perfect unity cannot simply vanish, its annihilation had to take the form of a shattering, into pieces, into multiplicity, into the fragments we call stars and cells and people. The universe is not creation. The universe is debris. Mainländer wrote that God is dead, and that God's death was the life of the world. In 1876, 6 years before Nietzsche published the phrase that made it famous. Nietzsche owned a copy of Mainländer's book. Whether he took anything from it is still argued over by people who care about such things. What isn't argued is Nietzsche's public verdict. He dismissed Mainländer in The Gay Science with a contemptuous phrase about a sentimental little apostle of chastity and moved on. But look at the shape of what the bank clerk had built. A single primordial unity, a catastrophic dispersal, an expanding field of fragments running down toward exhaustion. He wrote that in 1876, decades before Georges Lemaitre proposed a primeval atom, decades before anyone had measured a universe that was expanding at all. He wasn't doing physics, he was doing metaphysics, and he got there by pure inference, and the shape of it rhymed with what the telescopes would eventually find. That's what makes the story dangerous. It isn't the ravings of a broken man. It's elegant. Every premise leads to the next. Nothing is smuggled. It explains suffering, entropy, desire, and death with a single mechanism, which is more than most religions manage. He titled it The Philosophy of Redemption, and his redemption was non-existence, not paradise, not union. Just the end of the process, arriving for everything on schedule. And note that word, schedule, because the second volume of his system isn't cosmology at all, it's politics. He argued for social reform, for the redistribution of wealth, for a state that reduces suffering, for a slow collective movement of the whole species toward its resolution across historical time. His redemption was something the universe was already accomplishing on its own, patiently, without anybody's help and without anybody's hurry. That detail almost never survives the retelling, and it's the most damning one in the file. A system whose entire architecture says, wait, this resolves itself was authored by a man who did not wait. Keep that discrepancy in view. We'll need it. He sent the manuscript to be printed in the autumn of 1875. He had spent his savings, he had burned his health, he had, by his own account, finished the work he was born to do. In the spring of 1876, the printed copies arrived at his lodgings. He died that night, and here is where the story gets handled badly by almost everyone who tells it. The philosophy is treated as the cause, as if the argument reached out and did it, as if the logic had a body count. That's the comfortable version because it lets you keep a safe distance. Don't read that book, don't think those thoughts, stay in the shallow end. But there's a different question available, and it's the only one worth asking. Was the proof actually correct? The hidden premise. Every proof has premises, the prover states. And every proof has at least one, the prover doesn't, because he can't see it, because it isn't in the argument, because it's in the room where the argument was written. In 1983, two social psychologists, Norbert Schwarz and Schwarz Clore, ran an experiment so simple it's almost insulting. They called people on the telephone, random residents. The interviewer asked a set of questions ending with the big one, taking all things together. How satisfied are you with your life as a whole these days? Not how's your morning, not how's your week. Your life, the totality, everything you've built, everything you are, weighed and scored. The only variable the researchers manipulated was the weather outside the participants' window. People called on sunny days rated their entire lives as significantly more satisfying than people called on rainy days. Sit with that for a second. The reported value of an entire human existence, every relationship, every achievement, every loss, moved with the cloud cover. But the experiment has a second half, and the second half is the part that should keep you awake. For some participants, the interviewer opened with a throwaway line. By the way, how's the weather down there? That single question destroyed the effect completely. Once the participant had consciously registered the rain as the source of their mood, they stopped attributing the feeling to their life. Same rain, same gloom, different verdict. The mood was never information about their life. It was information about the sky. And the mind, unable to tell the difference, had been filing it in the wrong folder. This is what psychologists call mood-congruent judgment, and it's one of the most reliably replicated findings in the field. Your brain does not evaluate your life by reviewing your life. That would take days, and it isn't built for it. It uses a shortcut. It samples how you feel right now and treats that feeling as a summary of everything. How do I feel about it is the only question your mind is actually capable of answering. It just reports the answer as though you'd asked something bigger. There's a companion finding that makes it worse. In 1998, David Schade and Daniel Kahneman ran a study asking students in the Midwest and in Southern California to rate their own life satisfaction and to predict the life satisfaction of students in the other region. Both groups confidently predicted the Californians would be happier. Sunshine, beaches, obviously. Both groups were wrong. Actual reported satisfaction was effectively identical. The Californians weren't happier because on any given Tuesday, nobody in California is thinking about the weather. They're thinking about rent and a difficult colleague and whether the person they texted has replied. Climate only dominates the assessment of a life when someone directs your attention at climate. Kahneman later compressed the principle into one line that should be carved into the wall of every room where anyone thinks about their own existence at night. Nothing in life is as important as you think it is while you are thinking about it. Whatever you are currently focused on has swollen to fill the entire frame, not because it's important, because it's in the frame. So now go back to the bank clerk, 33 years old, voluntarily enlisted in a cavalry regiment, drilling by day, writing his system by night, sleeping in fragments, no money, no readers, no wife, no prospect of one. Chronically exhausted for 4 consecutive years, the exact physiological state Kruglanski's work identifies as the peak condition for seizing on an answer and freezing around it. And in that state, he sat down to evaluate not his week, not his year, but the total value of existence itself. He wasn't measuring the universe. He was measuring the weather. You've done this, not with a book, and not for 4 years, but you've done it. The thought that arrives at 3:40 in the morning that feels less like a thought and more like a revelation. The one that says, this is what my life actually is, and I have been lying to myself about it. It doesn't feel like an emotion. That's the whole trick. It feels like the emotion finally getting out of the way so you can see. You have never once made a judgment about your life. You have only ever made a judgment about the last 90 minutes and then multiplied it by infinity. Premise 3. Clarity is a feeling, not a verification. There's an obvious objection, and it's a good one, so let's take it seriously. Maybe the sad ones are simply right. Maybe happiness is the distortion, and despair is what's left when the distortion clears. That idea has actual research behind it, which is why it's so hard to shake. In 1979, Lauren Alloy and Lynn Abramson published a study with one of the great titles in psychological literature, Sadder but Wiser. They gave students a button and a light and varying degrees of real control over whether the light came on, then asked them to estimate how much control they'd actually had. The non-depressed students systematically overestimated. When the light came on often, they took credit for it, even in conditions where they had no influence whatsoever. The mildly depressed students were more accurate. Depressive realism. The finding launched 1,000 essays, and it has been quietly poisoning people ever since, because it hands sadness a credential. So look at what happened next, which almost nobody quotes. In 2012, Michael Moore and David Fresco published a meta-analysis of the accumulated depressive realism literature in Clinical Psychology Review. They found the effect was real and very small, roughly a correlation of 0.07. It showed up mainly in specific laboratory tasks, mainly in students who scored high on self-report questionnaires rather than in people with clinical diagnoses, and in several of the more rigorous designs it thinned out to nearly nothing. Depressed people were not seeing the world more accurately. In a narrow lab task about a light and a button, they were slightly less optimistically biased. That's the whole finding. That's the entire empire built on it. Being sad about your life does not make you an authority on your life. It makes you a witness with a known systematic distortion, one your mind is structurally unable to detect from the inside because the distortion is happening in the instrument. But the credential is only half the trap. The other half is why despair feels so much like a rival. There's a body of research on what's called processing fluency, work by Rolf Reber, Piotr Winkelmann, and Norbert Schwartz, among others, showing that the ease with which the mind processes an idea gets misread as evidence for its truth. Fluent ideas feel true, clunky ideas feel false. The brain uses the sensation of smoothness as a proxy for accuracy, and it does this beneath conscious awareness. Now ask which explanation of human existence is the most fluent. It's all pointless. 3 words, 0 moving parts, explains everything. Your failures, other people's success, the news, the ache in your chest, the entire history of the species, with a single stroke. It requires no follow-up. It generates no homework. It cannot be falsified by tomorrow. Nothing is easier to process than nothing. That frictionless quality, that sense of everything clicking into place, that is not the signature of a correct conclusion. It is the signature of a simple one. And exhausted minds don't produce correct conclusions. They produce simple ones and hand you the feeling of clarity as a receipt. The calm the families describe afterward isn't peace. It's the sound of a brain that has stopped generating alternatives, mistaking its own narrowing for the end of an argument. The 2 men who read the same map and kept walking. If the darkness were genuinely a proof, it would produce the same result in everyone who followed it to the end. It doesn't, and the exceptions are the most useful people in this entire story. In July 1967, in Saanen, Switzerland, a 50-year-old Indian man sat under a tree and experienced something he spent the next 40 years refusing to romanticize. His name was U.G. Krishnamurti. He called what happened to him the calamity, and he was vicious about anyone who tried to call it enlightenment. His background was pure spiritual establishment. Raised by a theosophist grandfather. Groomed inside the Theosophical Society. At 21, he sat in front of Ramana Maharshi, one of the most revered figures in Indian religious life, and asked him flatly whether he could hand over whatever he had. Ramana replied that he could give it, but could UG take it? UG walked out and spent decades concluding that there was nothing to hand over because there was nothing to get. After 1967, he became something the spiritual world had no category for, an anti-guru who spent his life dismantling the industry that had raised him. He refused money, he refused disciples, he refused to have his talks copyrighted, saying anyone could reproduce them however they liked because nothing in them belonged to him. When people arrived seeking peace, he told them to go home. His actual claim was harsher than anything Mainländer wrote, and stranger. The search, he said, is the problem, not a flawed method of solving the problem itself. The demand to be free from your condition is the mechanism that manufactures the condition. Thought is a protective survival tool that has escaped its function and begun using itself on itself, generating a permanent internal emergency and then selling you the cure. And the body, he insisted, has no such crisis. The body has never once been unhappy about being a body. It eats, sleeps, hurts, heals, and dies, and does all of it without commentary. People found him unbearable, and he seemed to prefer it that way. He had no technique to offer, no practice, no morning routine, no stages. When admirers described states of bliss they'd achieved, he told them they were describing a chemical event in a nervous system and congratulating themselves for it. When they asked what to do instead, he said there was nothing to do, and that the asking was the last thing standing between them and the ordinary life they already had. Same demolition site as Mainländer, every comfort removed. No God, no meaning, no destination, no reward. Opposite exit. Because Mainländer answered the question, UG deleted it. He didn't find a reason for existence. He removed the demand that existence provide one, and then went and had lunch. He lived to 88, wandered between the homes of people who put up with him, and complained about almost everything until the end. Then there's the Norwegian. In 1933, a mountaineer and philosopher named Peter Wessel Zapffe published an essay called The Last Messiah. His argument was that human consciousness is an evolutionary overshoot, a cognitive apparatus so powerful it perceives its own situation clearly, which no organism is built to survive. So we spend our lives suppressing that perception through 4 mechanisms he named precisely: isolation, the deliberate walling off of disturbing thoughts; anchoring, fastening yourself to fixed points, God, nation, career, family, that hold the structure up; distraction, flooding attention with input so nothing settles; sublimation, converting the horror into art, into philosophy, into an essay like the one he was writing. It's the bleakest text in Scandinavian philosophy. He concluded that the honest response was to stop having children. Zapffe lived to 90. He climbed rock faces into old age. He wrote comic pieces. Friends described a man of relentless humor who found the whole business funny in a way he never entirely explained. 2 men who saw everything Mainländer saw and did not arrive where he arrived, which means the conclusion was never in the premises. Something else put it there. The error in the proof. Watch this carefully, because the man who catches the mistake is the one Mainländer worshipped. Schopenhauer wrote about suicide directly, and his position surprises everyone who assumes the pessimist must have endorsed it. He refused to condemn it morally. He had contempt for the religious authorities who called it a crime, and he defended a person's ownership of their own existence in language that was scandalous for 1818. And then he said it doesn't work. His argument in section 69 of The World as Will and Representation is that suicide is not the denial of the will, it's the opposite. It is the will's strongest possible assertion. The person who does it is not rejecting life. They are rejecting the particular conditions life has handed them, and they are rejecting those conditions so violently and wanting different ones so badly that the wanting itself becomes unbearable. You cannot escape wanting by an act of overwhelming want. The whole system Mainländer inherited, built his life on, and extended, contained an explicit statement that the exit he took was not the theorem's conclusion. It was a refutation of it. He didn't prove his philosophy. By its own internal logic, he failed it. Which brings us finally to the undefined word. Every proof about existence commits the same fault, and it's the oldest logical error there is. It has a name: equivocation, a term that quietly shifts meaning between the premises and the conclusion, so the argument travels along a track that isn't continuous. The word is life. In Mainlander's premises, life means the impersonal process, entropy, striving, 10 billion years of stars converting hydrogen into ash. The word is doing cosmic work. In his conclusion, life means one specific exhausted 34-year-old man in rented rooms in Offenbach, with no money, no sleep, no readers, and a crate of books nobody had ordered. Those are not the same object. The premises were about a process. The conclusion was applied to a person, and a proof that changes the meaning of its central term halfway through isn't a proof. It's a sentence that sounds like one. Now bring it home, because this is the part that isn't about a dead German. When you sit at 3 a.m. and reach a verdict about your life, you're running the identical structure. Your premises are about life, the vast thing, the whole span, the shape of human existence. Your evidence is about the last 90 minutes. Your instrument is a mood you cannot audit. Your sample size is 1, and it's you, and you're tired. And out of that, you produce a conclusion with the confidence of arithmetic. Every mind does this. It is not a character flaw. It is a design feature of a machine that has to make fast global judgments using local data, because it evolved to keep an animal moving, not to grade the cosmos. But it does mean something specific and worth saying plainly. A conclusion about existence reached alone, at night, by an exhausted person, is not a conclusion. It's a symptom wearing a conclusion's clothes. None of this is a case you're meant to settle by yourself in the dark. Proofs get checked by other people. That isn't weakness. That's the only method anyone has ever had. So what did the man who solved life actually discover? He discovered that existence cannot be solved, and he discovered it in the most expensive way available, by producing a flawless-looking solution and watching what it cost. The category was wrong from the first line. A solution is something you find for a problem, a closed system, fixed variables, a state that admits an answer. Existence isn't that. It's a process. Ongoing, unfinished, changing its own terms while you're measuring it. You cannot solve a river. You can describe how it moves. You can predict where it floods. You can build something on the bank that doesn't wash away. But there is no final sentence about a river that stays true after you write it, because by the time the ink dries, the water is different water. Schopenhauer understood this in practice, even when his books didn't say it. The man who diagnosed existence as a pendulum between pain and boredom lived to 72, played the flute every single day of his adult life, ate dinner at the same restaurant for decades, kept a series of poodles he was openly sentimental about, and read the Upanishads before bed. He never once mistook his metaphysics for a set of instructions. His most devoted reader made exactly that mistake, and it took 4 years and everything he had. The forbidden part, the part that doesn't get said because it sounds like it's letting you off too easy when it's actually asking for more, is this. The feeling of having finally understood your life is not evidence about your life. It's a reading from an instrument that measures sleep, blood sugar, isolation, and light, every time, without exception, including the times it feels most like truth, especially then, because fluency is what a narrowed mind produces, not what an accurate one does, which doesn't mean that darkness is a lie. Premise 1 holds. You are a machine that generates wanting faster than it can generate satisfaction, and no amount of positive thinking edits that architecture. It means the darkness is data, not a verdict. It tells you something real about the mechanism you're running on. It tells you nothing at all about whether the thing is worth doing, because that question isn't the kind of question that has an answer sitting somewhere waiting to be found. UG figured that out and stopped asking. Zapfi figured it out and went climbing. Schopenhauer figured it out and picked up the flute. Mainländer got closer to a total explanation than almost any human being who has ever lived, and the tragedy isn't that he found something terrible. It's that he stopped one line short, right before the line where he would have had to define what he meant by the word he'd been using the whole time. Somewhere tonight, someone is finishing that same proof. In a small room, late, sure of every step, feeling that enormous quiet certainty settle over them like a coat. They think they're the first. They're roughly the 10 millionth, and not one of them has ever defined the word. If this opened your eyes, understand this is only what I can show publicly. There are videos I cannot upload for everyone. There are aspects of dark psychology that I simply cannot discuss publicly on YouTube without being censored or demonetized. The algorithm suppresses the most powerful information. Those exist behind the join button. If you're still here, you're not like the others. Subscribe if you haven't, but if you want what's hidden, click the join button and step into the architect level. You will unlock exclusive, uncensored videos that dive into the deepest parts of the human psyche. Most won't. That's the point.